Alright, third time's the charm. I tried to record this 2 other times this morning and it didn't work out. The first time I was outside because the temperature was nice. The weather is not very nice. And it started raining, so I came inside and then I was picking up where I left off and my camera, the memory card was full and it shut my camera down. So, I'm starting from scratch. We're reading chapter 4 from After You by Jojo Moyes, and it's a little bit shorter than yesterday, so let's get right into it. My name is Natasha, and I lost my husband to cancer 3 years ago. On a humid Monday night, the members of the Moving On Circle sat in a ring of orange office chairs in the Pentecostal church hall, alongside Mark, the leader, a tall, mustachioed man whose whole being exuded a kind of exhausted melancholy, and one empty chair. I'm Fred. My wife Jilly died in September. She was 74. Sunil, my twin brother, died of leukemia 2 years ago. William, dead father 6 months ago. All a bit ridiculous, frankly, as we never really got on when he was alive. Keep asking myself why I'm here. There was a peculiar scent to grief. It smelled of damp, imperfectly ventilated church halls and poor quality tea bags. It smelled of meals for one and stale cigarettes smoked hunched against the cold. It smelled of spritzed hair and armpits, little practical victories against a morass of despair. That smell alone told me I did not belong here, whatever I had promised Dad. I felt like a fraud. Plus, they all looked so sad. I shifted uneasily in my seat, and Mark caught me. He nodded and gave me a reassuring smile. "We know," it said. "We've been here before." "I bet you haven't," I responded silently. Sorry I'm late." The door opened, letting in a blast of warm air, and the empty chair was taken by a mop-headed teenager who folded his limbs into place, like they were always somehow too long for the space they were in. "Jake, you missed last week. Everything okay?" "Sorry, Dad messed up at work and he couldn't get me here." "Don't worry, it's good you made it. You know where the drinks are." The boy glanced around the room from under his long fringe, hesitating slightly when his gaze landed on my glittery skirt. I pulled my bag onto my lap in an attempt to hide it, and he looked away. "Hello, dear. I'm Daphne. My husband took his own life. I don't think it was the nagging." The woman's half-laugh seemed to leak pain. She patted her carefully set hair and looked down awkwardly at her knees. "We were happy. We were." The boy's hands were tucked under his thighs. "Jake, Mum, 2 years ago. I've been coming here for the past year because my dad can't deal with it, and I needed someone to talk to." "How is your dad this week, Jake?" said Mark. "Not bad. I mean, he brought home a woman last Friday night, but, he didn't sit on the sofa and cry afterward. So that's something." "Jake's father is handling his own grief in his own way," Mark said in my direction. "Shagging," said Jake. "Mostly shagging." "I wish I was younger," said Fred wistfully. He was wearing a tie, the kind of man who considers himself undressed without one. "I think that would have been a marvelous way to handle Jilly dying." "My cousin picked up a man at my aunt's funeral," said a woman in the corner, who might have been called Leanne. I couldn't remember. She was small and round and had a thick fringe of chocolate-colored hair. "Actually, during the funeral? She said they went to a travel lodge after the sandwiches. It's the heightened emotions, apparently." I was in the wrong place. I could see that now. Surreptitiously, I began to gather my belongings, wondering whether I should announce my leaving or whether it would be simpler to just run. And then Mark turned to me and smiled expectantly. I looked blankly at him. He raised his eyebrows. "Oh, me? Actually, I was just leaving. I don't think I'm... Oh, everyone wants to leave on their first day, dear. I wanted to leave on my second and third, too. That's the biscuits. I keep telling Mark we should have better biscuits. Just tell us the bare bones of it if you like. Don't worry, you're among friends. They were all looking, waiting. I realized I couldn't run. I hunched back into my seat. Okay. Well, my name's Louisa, and the man I loved died at 35. There were a few nods of sympathy around the room. Too young. When did this happen, Louisa? 20 months ago, and a week, and 2 days. 3 years, 2 weeks, and 2 days, Natasha smiled at me from across the room. There was a low murmur of commiseration. Daphne, beside me, reached out a plump, beringed hand and patted my leg. We've had many discussions in this room about the particular difficulties when someone dies young, said Mark. How long were you together? A little less than 6 months. A few barely hidden looks of surprise. That's quite brief, a voice said. I'm sure Louisa's pain is just as valid, said Mark smoothly. And how did he pass, Louisa? Pass what? Die, said Fred helpfully. Oh, he took his own life. Well, that must have been a great shock. Not really. I knew he was planning it. There is a peculiar sort of silence, it turns out, when you tell a room full of people who think they know everything there is to know about the death of a loved one that they don't. I took a breath. He knew he wanted to do it before I met him. I tried to change his mind, and I couldn't. So I went along with it because I loved him, and it seemed to make sense at the time. And now it makes a lot less sense, which is why I'm here. Death never makes sense, said Daphne. Unless you're Buddhist, said Natasha. I keep trying to think Buddhist thoughts, but I'm worried that Olaf is going to come back as a mouse or something, and I'm going to poison him. She sighed. I have to put poison down. We have a terrible mouse problem in our block. You'll never get rid of them. They're like fleas, said Sunil. For every one you see, there are hundreds of them behind the scenes. You might want to think about what you're doing, Natasha, love, said Daphne. There could be hundreds of little Olafs running around. My Alan could be one of them. You could actually be poisoning the both of them. Well, said Fred, if it's Buddhist, I'd just come back as something else, wouldn't... Hang on. Well, said Fred, if it's Buddhist, it would just come back as something else, wouldn't it? But what if it's a fly or something and Natasha kills that, too? I'd hate to come back as a fly, said William. Horrible black hairy things. He shuddered. I'm not like some mass murderer, said Natasha. You're making it sound like I'm out there slaughtering everyone's reincarnated husbands. Well, that mouse might be someone's husband, even if it isn't Olaf. I think we should try to steer this session back on track, said Mark, rubbing his temple. Louisa, it's brave of you to come and tell your story. Why don't you tell us a bit more on how you and... what was his name? How you met. You're in a circle of trust here. We've all pledged that these stories go no farther than these walls. It was at this point that I happened to catch Jake's eye. He glanced at Daphne, then at me, and shook his head subtly. I met him at work, I said, and his name was Bill. Despite what I had promised Dad, I hadn't planned to attend the moving on circle, but my return to work had been so awful that by the time the day ended, I hadn't been able to face going home to an empty flat. You're back! Carly had placed the cup of coffee on the bar, taken the businessman's change, and hugged me, all while dropping the coins into the correct sections of the till drawer in one fluid motion. What the hell happened? We heard you had an accident. I wasn't even sure you were coming back. Long story. I stared at her. What are you wearing? 9 o'clock on Monday morning, and the airport had been a blue-gray blur of men charging laptops, staring into iPhones, reading the city pages, or talking discreetly into handsets about market share. Carly caught the end of someone on the other side of the till. Yeah, well, things have changed since you've been gone. I turned to see a businessman standing on the wrong side of the bar. I blinked at him and put my bag down. If you'd like to wait there, I'll serve you. You must be Louisa. Oh, you must be Louise. He thrust out a hand. His handshake was emphatic and without warmth. I'm the new bar manager, Richard Percival. I took in his slick hair, his suit, his pale blue shirt, wondering what kind of bars he had actually managed. Nice to meet you. You're the one who's been off for 2 months. Well, yes, He walked along the optics, scanning each bottle. I just want you to know that I'm not a fan of people taking endless sick leave. My neck shifted a few centimeters back in my collar. I'm just laying down a marker, Louise. I'm not one of those managers who turn a blind eye. I know that in many companies, time off is pretty much considered a staff perk, but not in companies where I work. Believe me, I have not thought of the last 9 weeks as a perk. He examined the underside of a tap and rubbed it meditatively with his thumb. I took a breath before I spoke. I fell off a building. Perhaps I could show you my surgery scars. So, you can be reassured that I'm unlikely to want to do it again. He stared at me. There's no need to be sarcastic. I'm not saying you're about to have other accidents, but your sick leave is pro rata, at an unusually high level for someone who has worked for this company a relatively short time. That's all I wanted to point out, that it has been noted. He wore cufflinks with racing cars on them. Message received, Mr. Percival, I said. I'll do my best to avoid further near-fatal accidents. You'll need a uniform. If you give me 5 minutes, I'll get one out of the stockroom. What size are you, 12? 14? I stared at him. 10. He raised an eyebrow. I raised one back. As he walked off toward the stockroom, Carly leaned from the coffee machine and smiled sweetly in his direction. Utter bell end, she said, from the side of her mouth. She wasn't wrong. From the moment I returned, Richard Percival was, in the words of my father, all over me like a bad suit. He measured my measures, inspected every corner of the bar for molecular peanut crumbs, was in and out of the loos checking on hygiene, and wouldn't let us leave until he had stood over us, cashing up and ensuring each till roll matched takings to the last penny. I no longer had time to chat with the customers, to look up departure times, hand over lost passports, contemplate the planes we could see taking off through the great glass window. I didn't even have time to be irritated by Celtic Panpipes Volume 3. If a customer was left waiting to be served for more than 10 seconds, Richard would magically appear from his office, sighing ostentatiously, then apologize loudly and repeatedly for the fact that they had been kept waiting so long. Carly and I, usually busy with other customers, would exchange secret glances of resignation and contempt. He spent half the day meeting with reps, the other half on the phone to the head office, bleating about football and spends per head. We were encouraged to upsell the disgusting dry-roasted peanuts with every transaction, and taken to one side for a talking to if we forgot. All that was bad enough. But then there was the uniform. Carly came into the ladies as I was finishing getting changed and stood beside me in front of the mirror. We look like a pair of Egypts, she said. Not content with dark skirts and white shirts, some marketing genius high up the corporate ladder had decided that the atmosphere of the Shamrock and Clover chain would benefit from genuine Irish clothing. This genuine Irish clothing was evidently thought up by someone who believed that across Dublin, right this minute, businesswomen and checkout girls were pirouetting their way across their workplaces, dressed in embroidered tabards, knee-high socks, and lace-up dancing shoes, all in glittering emerald green, with accompanying curly ringlet wigs. Jesus. If my boyfriend saw me dressed like this, he'd dump me. Carly lit a cigarette and climbed up on the sink to disable the smoke alarm on the ceiling. Mind you, he'd probably want to do me first, the perv. What do the men have to wear? I pulled my short skirt out at the sides and eyed Carly's lighter nervously, wondering how flammable I was. Look outside, there's only Richard, and he has to wear that shirt with the green logo, the poor thing. That's it? No pixie shoes? Or little leprechaun hats? Surprise, surprise, it's only us girls who have to work looking like porno munchkins. I look like Dolly Parton, the early years in this wig. Grab a red one. Lucky us, we have a choice of 3 colors. From somewhere outside we could hear Richard calling. My stomach had begun to clench reflexively when I heard his voice. Anyway, I'm not staying. I'm going to river dance my way out of this place and into another job, Carly said. He can stick his bloody shamrocks up his tight little corporate arse. She had given what I could only describe as a sarcastic skip and left the ladies. I spent the rest of the day getting little electric shocks from the static. The moving on circle ended at 9:30. I walked out into the humid summer evening, exhausted by the twin trials of work and the evening's events. Too hot, I shrugged off my jacket, feeling suddenly that having laid myself bare in front of a room full of strangers, being seen in a faux Irish dancer uniform that was, in truth, ever so slightly too small, didn't really make much difference. I hadn't been able to talk about Will, not the way they talked, as if their loved ones were still part of their lives, perhaps in a room next door. Oh yes, my Jilly used to do that all the time. I can't delete my brother's voicemail message. I have a little listen to his voice when I feel like I'm going to forget what he sounds like. Sometimes I can hear him in the next room. I could barely even say Will's name. And listening to their tales of family relationships, of 30-year marriages, shared houses, lives, children, I felt like a fraud. I had been a caregiver for someone for 6 months. I loved him and watched him end his life. How could these strangers possibly understand what Will and I had been to each other during that time? How could I explain the way we had so swiftly understood each other? The shorthand jokes, the blunt truths, and raw secrets. How could I convey the way those short months had changed the way I felt about everything? The way he had skewed my world so totally that it made no sense without him in it. And when it came down to it, what was the point in re-examining your sadness all the time anyway? It was like picking away at a wound and refusing to let it heal. I knew what I had been part of. I knew what my role was. What was the point in going over it and over it? I wouldn't come next week. I knew now. I would find an excuse for Dad. I walked slowly across the car park, rummaging in my bag for my car keys, telling myself it at least meant that I didn't have to spend another evening alone in front of my television, dreading the passing of the 12 hours until I had to return to work. His name wasn't really Bill, right? Jake fell in step alongside me. Nope. Daphne's like a one-woman broadcasting corporation. She means well, but your personal story will be all over her social club before you can say rodent reincarnation. Thanks for that. He grinned at me and nodded toward my lurex skirt. Nice threads, by the way. It's a good look for a grief counseling session. He stopped briefly to retie a shoelace. I stopped with him. I hesitated and then said, I'm sorry about your mom. He looked down, his face somber. You can't say that. It's like prison. You can't ask someone what they're in for. Really? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't. He looked up and grinned. I'm joking. See you next week. A man leaning against a motorbike lifted a hand in greeting. He stepped forward as Jake crossed the car park and enveloped him in a bear hug, kissing the side of his cheek. I stopped to watch, mostly because it was rare to see a man hug his son like that in public, once they were over book bag carrying age. How was it? Okay, the usual. Jake gestured to me. Oh, this is Louisa. She's new. The man squinted at me. He was tall and broad-shouldered. A nose that just might have once been broken gave him the faintly bruising appearance of a former boxer. I nodded a polite greeting. It was nice to meet you, Jake. Bye then. I lifted a hand and began to make my way to my car, but as I passed, the man kept staring at me, and I felt myself slowly start to color under the intensity of his gaze. You're that girl, he said. Oh no, I thought, slowing suddenly. not here too. I stared at the ground for a moment and took a breath. Then I turned back to face them both. Okay, as I've just made clear in the group, my friend made his own decisions. All I ever did was support them. Not that, if I'm honest, I really want to get into this right here and with a complete stranger. Jake's father continued to squint at me. He lifted his hand to his head. I understand that not everybody will get it, but that's the way it was. I don't feel I have to debate my choices, and I'm really tired, and it's been a bit of a day, and I think I'm going to go home now. He cocked his head to one side, and then he said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I frowned. The limp. I noticed you have a limp. You live near that massive new development, right? You're the girl who fell off the roof. March? April? And suddenly I recognized him. Oh, you were the paramedic. We were the team who picked you up. I'd been wondering what happened to you. I felt myself almost buckle with relief. I let my gaze run over his face, his hair, his arms, suddenly recalling with Pavlovian accuracy his reassuring manner, the sound of the siren, the faint scent of lemons, and I let out a breath. I'm good. Well, not good exactly. I have a shot hip and a new boss who's an utter arse, and, I'm at a grief counseling group in a damp church hall with people who are just really, really sad, said Jake helpfully. The hip will get better. It's plainly not hindering your dance career. My laugh emerged as a honk. Oh, no, this is the outfit related to the boss who's an arse, not my normal mode of dress. Anyway, thank you. Wow. I put my hand to my head. This is weird. You saved me. He shook his head. It's good to see you. We don't often get to see what happens afterward. You did such a great job. You were really kind. I remember that much. De nada. I stared at him. De nada. Spanish. It was nothing. Oh, okay then. I take it all back. Thanks for nothing. He smiled, turned away, and raised a paddle-sized hand. Afterward, I didn't know what made me do it. Hey, he looked back toward me. It's Sam, actually. Sam, I didn't jump. Okay. No, really, I know you've just seen me coming from a grief counseling group and everything, but I wouldn't jump. He gave me a little look that seemed to suggest he had seen and heard everything. Good to know. We gazed at each other for a minute, then he lifted his hand again. Nice to see you again, Louisa. He pulled on a helmet, and Jake climbed onto the bike behind him. I found myself watching as they pulled out of the car park. And because I was still watching, I just caught Jake's exaggerated eye roll as he pulled on his own helmet. And then I remembered what he had said in the session. The compulsive shagger. Idiot, I told myself, and limped across the rest of the tarmac to where my car was boiling gently in the evening heat. So, maybe not much of a cliffhanger in Chapter 4, but still fleshing out the story for us. I'm really enjoying this book, and I hope that you're enjoying it too. If you are, please subscribe to my channel and make sure you click or touch the bell icon to be notified of all future uploads. And like this video. It'll attract more people to coming to hear our story time. I hope you're all still staying safe and isolated and healthy and happy and creative. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.